Tonight we have an anonymous exegete.
Ooh, that sounds bad.
Who is purporting to tell us about his discovery of what he calls the real Jewish calendar.
Oh, really?
We'll let our audience decide, Brother Snyder.
Yes, that is Yahad approved.
You are about to experience Jackson Snyder Presents. Direct from the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology, and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Come, join me in a journey of discovery. It's a modern tale of unearthing long-forgotten secrets of the past. But instead of physically traveling to foreign lands, this journey takes place while digging through some research. Yes, it might get a bit dirty and complicated, but the reward is in sight. You might never look at history the same way again. To start this investigation, we need to take an overall view about the process and flow of knowledge. When you are presented with a particular topic, you might or might not already have some basic understanding about that topic. That understanding is shaped by many things. For example, let's consider the topic of the Old Testament. Many people who sit down and read a passage bring with them a typical Western way of thinking. If you read the text in English, you might not know it is actually a translation from the original language, Hebrew. You might not realize the particular differences that Middle Eastern culture brought to their way of life and thinking. If you do want to dig deeper and truly understand more, you would then seek out experts and weigh whether or not their views have merit. These experts are most likely also coming from a Western mindset, although they might have studied the ancient cultures of that time period and can explain the important differences that exist. If you want to investigate even deeper, you would seek out those who speak Hebrew and who have first-hand experience of the culture. After going through all that effort, you would think that you have a reliably accurate understanding of the topic. However, how much of the knowledge of these experts is based on centuries of tradition? And how much is knowledge based on verifiable research? What happens if the experts themselves are mistaken in their understanding? Over the past decade, I have come to the conclusion that this is the situation with the Jewish calendar. After much research, I am convinced that I have uncovered verifiable evidences that prove the modern Jewish calendar is not the same as that which was used during biblical times. This is simply a preposterous statement. I realize that. How could something of this magnitude not have been discovered up until this point? Why wouldn't the experts not have realized this? Let's explore this further, and I think you will begin to understand how this could be possible. As with anything, it's all in the details. The first step is to become familiar with how the Jewish calendar works. Only then can the various important issues be described and addressed. Yes, calendars can be complicated, but I am sure that when simplified to the core concepts, anyone will be able to understand the issues and how things could have become confused over the centuries. This will take a bit of time to develop fully. I know that when I encounter people making these types of claims, I don't want to waste my time as they drone on with their endless details. So I'll try to state the claim as quickly and simply as possible. Then, if it still sounds intriguing, there will be other presentations that fill in the proofs in detail. Let's return to the reader who comes to the Bible and comes across information about months and years. From the usual Western mindset, the assumption will be that the information presented is a year consisting of 365 and a quarter days. It's made up of 12 months, which can be of 30, 31, 28, or 29 days. A day is assumed to start and end at midnight. Without any further research, everything that they read will be slotted into these assumptions. That's where a lot of people are and will stay. In recent years, there are many who have researched how the Jewish calendar operates. The important feasts and holidays are tied to certain times of their year. What once was esoteric information is becoming more well known. This information is from experts and historians, and this gives a more clear and accurate view of the customs and practices of ancient times. However, we must always verify this information and not assume that things are as they are traditionally thought. So here is the issue with the calendar explained in simple terms and leaving out a lot of the other details. The modern Jewish calendar is a calculated calendar. The most basic concepts are based on the phase of the new moon and the position of the sun. It is a luni-solar calendar. Each month consists of a full cycle of the moon. The cycle of the moon is roughly 29 and a half days in length. Since a day cannot be less than 24 hours or be half a day in length, a month is either 29 or 30 full days long. 12 months makes up a year. Therefore, a normal year is 354 days long. That is, 29 and a half days times 12 months is equal to 354 days. Some people say that the Jewish calendar has 360-day years. This is simply not true. A lunar year is always 354 days long. The time it takes for the Earth to orbit the sun is roughly 365 and a quarter days. That means each year of 354 days is a little more than 11 days short. After several years, this difference would lead to months being out of sync with the seasons. The Western calendar uses a leap day every few years to bring things back into sync. The Jewish calendar uses a leap month, adding an entire month to keep things in sync. Every 2 or 3 years, an extra month is added just before the spring equinox, so that the first month of the religious year is kept aligned with the seasons. This additional month every 2 or 3 years happens in a predictable pattern and is called the Metonic cycle. It consists of a repeatable 19-year pattern. In order to determine whether or not to add an additional month, divide the Jewish year number by 19. If the remainder is 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17, or 19, add an intercalary month. For example, let's use the Jewish year of 5760. Jewish years are counted from what they have determined as year 0 from the creation of the world, about 6,000 years ago. 5760 divided by 19-year Metonic cycle is 303. That is, there have been 303 complete cycles of 19 years. The remainder says that it's the third year into the next cycle. Looking at the set of years, 3 is one of the years that should have an additional month added. That year would have 30 more days and would consist of 384 days instead of the normal 354 days. Here is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Let's take the first day of the first month of the religious year, Nisan 1. Let's say we are interested in determining what equivalent day that is in our calendar. In a normal year of 354 days, Nisan 1 would occur usually sometime in March. However, if the year number remainder corresponds to one of the numbers set up in the 19-year cycle, an additional month would be added. This would push Nisan 1 out 30 days, and this would then occur sometime in April. These rules about intercalary months are very clear for modern years. However, how confident are we that this Metonic cycle has been operating this way all the way back to biblical times? If we are interested in specific dates from thousands of years ago, this is a very important thing to investigate. Consider for a minute that the maximum space between adding an extra year is 3 years. What if the 19-year cycle was anchored to one of the other years in between instead? This would mean that an additional month would not be added this year, but should be instead added the following year, or maybe the previous year. So you can see that it is very important to verify just how long the 19-year cycle has been anchored to the current method, and if it was operating this way thousands of years ago. The entire system of accurate dates depends on that. As far as I can determine, this particular area has not been adequately understood by the majority of people seeking to determine accurate dates. There are assumptions being made, and this is very understandable, since most people are not intimately familiar with the details of how the Jewish calendar functions and the mathematics that underlie its structure and operation. Have I piqued your interest yet? Are you beginning to see the potential problem? Can you understand the massive bombshell this could be if the 19-year cycle has in fact been shifted? The dates that people have assumed were correct because they used the modern calendar rules might not in fact be accurate. Some accepted dates might actually be off up to a month from where they actually occurred in history. To be clear, The basic structure of the calendar has not changed, but one of the important details on how it is kept synchronized with the seasons might well be different over the years. This is a subtle change. It could explain how it has not been noticed until now. The months have been kept synchronized so the majority of the population would never notice anything was amiss. But if the year that the synchronization was anchored to has shifted, then dates which we might think are accurate could actually not have occurred. They would have occurred in an entirely different month. And so ends our preliminary investigation. We're just starting to sweep aside the layers of this subject. I have sought to describe this as simply and as clearly as possible. It will take other presentations to lay out the evidences that exist to show that this has really happened. We'll continue in part 2. Are you ready to continue our journey investigating the ancient Hebrew calendar? We've only just begun to clear away the top layer, looking for the treasures underneath. There are so many more incredible discoveries that await. When the claim is made that the real Jewish calendar has been rediscovered, what does that mean exactly? It is a subtle thing, but this subtlety leads to the most important discovery. To be clear, the basic structure and operation of the Jewish calendar has not changed over thousands of years. The claim is not that there is a completely different type of calendar that once existed. The key lies in the way the calendar is tied to the seasons in order to keep it synchronized. This might seem like it wouldn't matter that much, but the manner in which the year is synchronized affects when specific dates actually occurred in history. And that is the ultimate goal, to make sure we have accurate dates. Let's review. The Jewish calendar is a luni-solar calendar. Each month consists of a full cycle of the phases of the moon, with each cycle lasting roughly 29.5 days. Since a day cannot be less than 24 hours or be half a day in length, a month is either 29 or 30 full days long. 12 months makes up a year, and therefore a normal year is 354 days long. The time it takes for the Earth to orbit the Sun is roughly 365.25 days. That means each lunar year of 354 days is about 11 days short of a solar year. After several years, this difference would lead to months being out of sync with the seasons. To fix this, every 2 or 3 years, an extra month is added just before the spring equinox so that the first month of the religious year is kept aligned with the seasons. This additional month every 2 or 3 years happens in a predictable pattern and is called the Metonic cycle. It consists of a repeatable 19-year pattern. These are the most basic elements of the modern Jewish calendar. Let's get to our next layer. Exactly when and where did the modern Jewish calendar originate? Those who have researched the history of the modern Jewish calendar, such as the book Calendar and Community by Stern, identify Hillel II as the person who codified the current rules of the calendar. The calendar was originally managed by the religious leaders for many centuries during the time the temple in Jerusalem existed. From 70 AD onwards, after the destruction of the temple, it became increasingly difficult to manage the calendar as the population dispersed. There was no reliable way to communicate the start of each new month over vast distances. The need for the various sacrifices faded from importance due to the absence of the temple in Jerusalem. Certain religious aspects could no longer be done, and therefore the sole reliance on religious leaders to oversee the operation of the calendar gave way to a broader knowledge of the calculations and the various rules of the calendar construction. It is certain that the particular pattern of the Metonic cycle was in its present form from at least 350 AD onward. In researching the previous information, this seems to be where scholars have stopped their investigations. For me, the significant question that arises is whether there is any evidence of what the pattern of intercalation was going further back through history. I cannot find anyone else who has researched this area. As far as I'm aware, what I will be now presenting is original research that very few are aware of. A very valuable chronological resource exists, which has used available archaeological information to reconstruct the calendar dates for the Babylonian, Persian, and Seleucid periods, from 600 BC to 775 AD. This resource is the Babylonian chronology. The authors speculate that the intercalations, or the leap months, used during the Babylonian period began within the reign of Nabonassar, circa 747 BC. The calendar of this time intercalated either in the spring or in the autumn, before settling on a fixed pattern. Up until about 600 BC, the intercalations were wildly erratic, some years occurring in spring and some occurring in autumn. Interestingly, after 600 BC, when the Jewish exile to Babylon begins, the intercalations are shifted almost completely from autumn to spring, which is the start of the religious year for the Jewish people. This period also marks the beginning of the final fixed intercalation pattern, which does not change over the subsequent centuries. Is this evidence of the rise of the influence of the prophet Daniel, as he becomes the head of the Magi in the Babylonian kingdom during this time? This group of Magi, or astrologers, was in charge of determining the calendar for the regional empire. This is a question for further research. Getting back to the topic, taking the information from the previous chart, it can be reworked with the associated Jewish year along with the Julian year. The years with an extra month can be placed in the proper place in the chart. What emerges is a cycle that was in place during that era. It is the sequence of 1, 4, 7, 10, 12, 15, and 18. Compare this with the modern sequence and you can see that the cycles are not the same. The current cycle is shifted 1 year previous. So the precedent exists that the Metonic cycle for the Jewish calendar has been anchored to a different year. As far as I can tell, no one else has ever recognized this before. Is there yet more evidence that exists? Yes, a great deal more. It comes from a long forgotten and unrecognized source. One of Google's projects was to digitize long out-of-print books and make them available for public access. There is a book which was published in 1878 and has never been republished. One copy has been laying on an obscure shelf in a seldom visited dark corner of a library before the digitizer chose to preserve its valuable contents. This book is an English translation of Al-Biruni's Vestiges of the Past. He was a Muslim scholar from around 1000 AD. His book describes the technical and historical aspects of various calendars from cultures such as the Persians, the Arabs, and Zoroastrians, and including the Jews. Encyclopedia Britannica's entry of Al-Biruni states that it preserves the best pre-modern description of the cultures Al-Biruni came to know. In this latter work, for example, is the most elaborate treatment of the Jewish calendar, more extensive than any surviving medieval Hebrew source and much more scientifically reasoned than any other treatment that this calendar had received up until that time. He discusses intercalation cycles in 2 different sections of his book. The first is something he calls the Table of Kebeot, which functions like a Rosetta Stone for converting dates. It allows conversion between the modern Jewish years, Julian calendar years, and years tied to Alexander the Great. It is important to note that at the time Al-Biruni wrote his treatise on the calendar, that Hillel had already codified the modern rules for the Jewish calendar. Al-Biruni's table can be investigated and the Metonic cycle in use can be determined. Similar to the information in the Babylonian chronology, a spreadsheet can be constructed and the Jewish years can be associated with the Julian years. If you then divide each Jewish year by 19, the remainder that is left can be recorded. If an additional month was added for that particular remainder, then these years can be marked. The Metonic cycle in use becomes evident. Here, the cycle is 1, 4, 7, 9, 12, 15, and 18. Al-Biruni's Table of Kebeot does not use the modern Metonic cycle. Even though he constructed this chart using contemporary years, i.e. around 1000 AD, the significant thing to notice is that he did not use the modern Metonic cycle. It reflects a Metonic pattern from over 600 years prior, that in the Babylonian era. Actually, in his entire work, the modern Metonic cycle cannot be found at all. The area of what was to become modern Iraq and Iran continued to use the Metonic cycle first used during the ancient Babylonian Empire. Since Al-Biruni lived in this area, it makes perfect sense that his charts make use of this particular pattern. The other section in his book discusses the intercalation cycle still used in the Syrian locale, the location of the ancient Jewish population. Now, although they agreed on the quality of the year as to the order of intercalation in the cycle, when it has to take place and when not, they differed among each other regarding the nature of the beginning of the cycles. And for some take the current year of the era Adami, that is, the Jewish year, of which you want to know whether it is a common year or a leap year, and reduce the number of years to cycles by dividing them by 19. Then you get complete cycles, and as a remainder, the years of the cycle not yet finished, including the current year. And then the order of the leap years is fixed according to the formula, i.e. the 2nd, 5th, 7th, 10th, 13th, 16th, and 18th years. Others take the years of the same era Adami, Jewish year, subtract 1 year, and fix the order of the leap years in the remainder of the years of the incomplete cycle according to the formula, i.e. the 1st, 4th, 6th, 9th, 12th, 15th, and 17th years. These two cycles are attributed to the Jews of Syria. What you notice if you compare these two cycles, since one just uses a subtraction, the resulting cycles are exactly the same across the 19-year cycle. The very important point to notice is that this Metonic cycle anchored to these particular years was what was used in the Syrian locale. That is, the area of the ancient Jewish homeland. And it is from the time period of the biblical era, even before the Temple and Jerusalem were destroyed in 70 AD. Sharp-eyed viewers will realize that there are 3 different intercalation cycles now. There are actually 4, but one of them is just a slight variation of the other. Using some simple math, we can build a chart for any sequence of years to compare the different cycles and which years are specified to have an additional month. Let's take the sequence of years between 8 BC and 38 AD. For example, year 1 AD is Jewish year 3761. So 3761 divided by 19 has a remainder of 18. The modern calendar rules state to not add a month for this year. The Babylonian Artaxerxes rules state that an additional month should be added for this year. The rules for the ancient Jewish homeland also state to add an additional month for this year. This can be continued for a series of years to generate a chart. So what does this then mean? What does this prove? So let's again take the example of Nisan 1, the beginning of the first year of the religious year, first month of the religious year. What would be the equivalent date in 1 AD? According to the modern Jewish calendar rules, no intercalary month should be added. Nisan 1 would be equivalent to March 14th. According to the Babylonian calendar rules, an intercalary month should be added. Nisan 1 would be equivalent to April 12th. This would be the same with the ancient Jewish homeland rules where the Jewish people live. That is a significant difference, a difference of an entire month. Using the current modern Jewish calendar to determine that a date in history happened in March is quite different from that of an ancient Jewish calendar, which states that the same Jewish date actually happened in April. Can this be possible? Could many of the dates that scholars have assumed all this time actually be incorrect? Why hasn't this been noticed before? I think you can see why this could very well be possible. It is somewhat complicated to get your head around, isn't it? But once you understand the mechanics of the calendar, it is obvious. However, most experts that I've investigated make statements where it is quite plain that they don't understand the mechanics of the Jewish calendar. For example, many state that the Jewish calendar is made up of 360-day years. It is easy to show that with a lunar calendar, a typical year is 354 days long, and with an intercalary month, the year is 384 days long. There is no way to get a 360-day year. Due to their incorrect statement alone, anything that they state about ancient dates is suspect. But which one of these Metonic cycles is actually correct to use for historical dates? Are there any other evidences that would support this groundbreaking discovery? There are. It would take some time to explain things fully, but to be brief, the original Jewish calendar is tied to certain unique agricultural keys. During the Temple era, the spring religious feasts depended on having ripe barley for religious rituals. The specific life cycle of winter barley leads to the Metonic cycle being tied to a certain anchor year, that of the cycle of the Syrian area, which we have rediscovered, specifically the Jewish homeland, not the modern Jewish Metonic cycle, and not the Babylonian era cycle. Both the modern cycle and the Babylonian cycle are not tied to the specific life cycle of winter barley in the homeland of the Jews. This alone disqualifies using the modern Jewish intercalation cycle to determine ancient dates. In addition, Josephus, the Jewish historian, often includes information to date historical events that he records. Some dates just do not make sense according to the modern Jewish calendar. Scholars cannot reconcile his information and conclude he was in error. However, if one considers the intercalation cycle of the ancient Syrian area, which has now been rediscovered, then the dates are easily resolved. And finally, the timing of various eclipses, both solar and lunar, give evidence to the rediscovered Metonic cycle of the Jewish homeland.
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Shrumkov. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
And finally, the timing of various eclipses, both solar and lunar, give evidence to the rediscovered Metonic cycle of the Jewish homeland. These eclipse records have been meticulously determined by NASA and are an independent source which verifies this research. Other videos will examine these topics in greater detail. In order to explain them fully, a lot of calculations must be shown. The goal of this presentation has been to present the issue as simply as possible and show there is some long-forgotten information that modern scholarship has not recognized. Admittedly, intercalation is very technical, which can be confusing at first. However, it is extremely important, and the accuracy of ancient dates depends on getting this information correct. Other presentations will demonstrate that by using this information, suddenly well-known issues with ancient dates resolve themselves. For example, determining the actual year of Jesus Christ's birth and death become easily evident. It has been fascinating to dig through long-forgotten ancient documents to discover the treasures that are there. This lays the foundation that many other discoveries are built on and will be revealed. I have published a book that examines all these discoveries in great detail. It describes the rediscovery of the ancient Jewish calendar along with many other discoveries that result from it. Prophecies which have confused many people through the centuries now can be understood in a consistent and literal fashion. Various problematic dates of biblical events can be more easily determined. It contains references to all the documented sources so you can verify these things for yourself. Thanks for joining me as we have uncovered long lost information which has a direct impact on our understanding of the ancient past. Welcome back. The goal of this presentation is to examine the characteristics of the various lunar calendars and the associated Metonic cycles which have been discovered. These were revealed over the previous two parts. They are not just random numbers. There is a mathematical relationship at play, not just internally over the 19-year pattern, but each is tied to a particular environmental condition which results in the special characteristics of the particular calendar. This is something that is not common knowledge. In my research over the past 15 years, I have not come across anyone who has realized this. Or if somebody has, it has not been made widely known. This information is very significant because it can be shown that the modern Jewish calendar should not be relied on for accurate historical dates, especially before 350 AD. Fair warning, this will be a more technical presentation. Discussing calendar rules and showing calculations must be done in order to prove the mathematical relationships at work. This is most likely why more people are not aware of this information. They have not taken the time to explore the mathematical relationships. I hope that by the end, you will see why all the technical discussion was necessary. I won't go over too much detail in review. The previous two parts laid out the basic operation of the luni-solar calendar. This means that the calendar is both tied to the lunar cycles and to the solar cycle. 12 lunar months is 11 days short of the solar year. Over several years, the start of a lunar year would slip earlier in the seasons. In order to keep the seasons synchronized, every 2 to 3 years, an extra month is added. This is done around the time of the spring equinox. Traditionally, the start of the year for various Middle Eastern cultures was the spring and was tied to religious festivals. In particular, Passover is one of the 3 spring festivals of the Jewish calendar. The pattern of adding these additional months forms a 19-year cycle. The previous presentations revealed that there are several Metonic cycles which have been in operation over the millennia. Each is a 19-year cycle. However, the start of each cycle is anchored to a different year. Viewing the chart, it might look like just a random order. However, that is not the case. The fact that these different cycles exist is not at all common knowledge. The reason why each pattern looks like it does is even less well understood. When I first came across the historical documents which described the various Metonic cycles, there was the initial shock that they even existed. I had thought that different Metonic cycles should exist, and that was what prompted me to do the initial research to begin with. However, when I found them, I was left with the task of how to verify that this was trustworthy information. I, too, thought that each was just anchored randomly. What I decided to do is put together a thought experiment for each different type of calendar. I chose a set of ancient years and considered the rules that were specific to each calendar. Since every new month is tied to each new moon, the beginning of each year could be determined. The pattern of additional months would reveal themselves over the course of the range of years. What I needed was information about historical dates of the phases of the moon. Phases of the moon have been very accurately determined going back millennia and are available. So armed with the dates of each new moon and the rules for the calendars, I started charting out what would be the start of each year in the range I had determined. But before we get into the math and the charts, we need to determine the rules for the start of the year for each type of calendar. For the Equinox and the Julian calendar shift, the rules of the modern Jewish calendar were codified by Hillel II around 350 AD. The beginning of the religious year, the month of Nisan, was determined by something eventually called the rule of the equinox. In the Talmud, the Jewish religious commentary, written at around the same time, the instruction was given: when you see the cycle of Tibet extends to the 16th of Nisan, declare that year a leap year, and have no scruples. Since it is written, observe the month of Abib, which signifies, see to it that the Abib of the cycle should commence in the earlier half of Nisan. This needs some explanation. First, the 16th of Nisan. Nisan is the first month of the religious year and contains 3 of the 7 main festivals of the year. The 16th of Nisan is important because that is the day of the month that a particular ritual took place, which was tied to the springtime agriculture. The cycle of Tibet is another term for the winter season. That meant if winter extended past Nisan 16 without the spring equinox occurring yet, that meant that the festivals were happening too early in the year. That year should add an additional month, and the festivals would happen in the following month. So in other words, if Passover would happen before the spring equinox, then add an intercalary month that year. But when exactly is the spring equinox? We are used to the dates of March 20 or 21. However, that is in the Gregorian calendar, a calendar which came into use in 1582 AD. Before that, the Julian calendar was in use, and the equinox occurred on March 25. Over the centuries, due to the slight inaccuracies of the calendar has shifted those several days. It is important to keep the various calendars in mind when working with historical dates. Instead of March 21st, we'll use the March 25th Julian date for the spring equinox rule, the Babylonian New Year rule. Next, let's discuss the New Year rule for the ancient Babylonian calendar. This calendar was in use around 600 BC and lasted until at least 75 AD in the modern area of Iraq and Iran. According to Stern, in his book Calendar and Community, the rule to begin the new year was the first new moon after the spring equinox. Their New Year festival, a spring rebirth called Akitu, must happen after the equinox. It is very interesting to observe the historical record of when years actually began, which is found in the Babylonian chronology. You will notice that most years began in April. This verifies the rule of the first new moon after equinox was in place during this time. The Jewish observed calendar. The Jewish calendar was not always a fixed calendar. It was originally based on observations of the new moon and of the state of the barley harvest. During the era of the Second Temple, circa 530 BC until 70 AD, the Great Sanhedrin oversaw the decisions for the calendar. They would hold a special court called the Bet Yatzek on the 30th day after the first day of the month. They would declare the start of a new month based on the testimony of 2 witnesses. These witnesses would give evidence that they had seen the first sliver of the moon's crescent after the new moon phase. The new month was decided at the phase of the new moon when the earth, moon, and sun are in line. They were in conjunction. However, the actual phase of the new moon could not be seen, so they had to wait until they saw the very first signs of the moon's light after this phase. Since the lunar cycle is 29.5 days long, a month could have either 29 or 30 days. They met on the 30th day and heard from any available witnesses. If the witnesses were credible, then that day was declared the first day of the new month, the previous month declared as having 29 days. If there were no witnesses at that time, then the next day was declared the first day, the previous month declared as having 30 days. The religious leaders also decided on the beginning of the new religious year. This was very much tied to the state of the ripeness of the barley. One of their 3 spring festivals, called First Fruits, depended on having ripe barley available for the priest to do a wave offering, lifting up the first ripe barley before the altar. You shall bring the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord, so that you may be accepted. On the day after the Sabbath, the priest shall wave it. Only after could the population begin to harvest and enjoy the new crop. Since this festival happened in the middle of the month, if they didn't observe green heads of barley in the fields at the beginning of the month, they knew there would be no ripe barley available as needed. This is when they added an extra month, which would give the barley enough time to ripen and be ready for the required festival. Barley has a particular life cycle, which is tied to the sun. It is this intersection of solar along with lunar which gives the calendar based on observation its unique character. There are 2 types of barley, summer barley and winter barley. Winter barley is planted in the autumn and is the earliest maturing grain in the springtime. It is known to be the fastest growing of the winter grains, with roots traveling over 6 feet deep in the ground. This type of barley can handle both weather and soil extremes, having the highest soil salinity and pH tolerance of all the cereal crops. It is not just that winter barley can survive colder winter weather, but it requires it. There is a period of vernalization. This is one of 2 internal switches which must be flipped on in order for the process of flowering and the production of grain to start. The second switch is what is called photoperiod. Barley is a long day plant, having a requirement for a certain number of daylight hours. The plant starts its growth phase in vernalization, waiting until a certain number of cold hours have been met. During this time, it hugs the ground with a very flat growth habit. Its growing tip is near the soil surface, which reduces the risk of damage from this period of colder weather. Once the required number of cold hours have been reached, it enters a phase where it is affected by the length of day, waiting for a day with a certain number of daylight hours. When this is met, the reproductive phase switches on and the rate of development drastically increases. After meeting these 2 internal requirements, the barley enters a 2-week optimal flowering window. In Israel, located at roughly 31 degrees latitude, wild barley flowers for a 2-week period in early to mid-March. Just 10 degrees further north, that is, for example, in Spain, the winter barley flowering occurs in mid-April. These particular characteristics of barley can be relied on as an extremely precise calendar trigger point, which is specific to a relatively small geographic region. After flowering, 2 phases of grain development begin: cell division and grain filling. Cell division starts after the fertilization process and continues for 14 to 30 days, depending on the variety of barley, the environmental conditions, and the position in the head of grain. The process of grain filling begins 5 to 10 days after fertilization and continues until the grain is fully ripe and depends mainly on the temperature and moisture condition. Physiological maturity occurs between 40 to 50 days after flowering. In Israel, this would be from mid to late April. The outward sign is a loss of green coloring, and the grain's loss of moisture is very rapid during the stage, the period of optimal barley harvest. However, barley is still harvestable a few weeks before this time as well. The seed embryo development inside each grain is complete roughly 25 days after flowering, on average shortly after the vernal equinox. The photoperiod requirement is extremely important in determining the start of the plant's reproduction phase and when Abib barley would occur. Although weather and environmental conditions have a part to play, it is this internal switch that determines the flowering phase based on the amount of daylight hours experienced. This requirement is consistent and predictable every year as the short days of winter gradually lengthen, approaching the longer days of spring. The result is a relatively short time frame of 2 weeks, occurring on average 2 to 3 weeks before the spring equinox. Formation of green ears of grain would be evident immediately following, around 1 week before the spring equinox, the barley being in a state of Abib. This is a possible explanation of why the vernal equinox rule would have been specified in the rules for the modern calendar. When observing the winter barley growth, it is consistent with a beep occurring around the time of the equinox. However, the significance must have been forgotten over the centuries, since the observation of the barley harvest could no longer occur after the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Eventually, it was the date of the Passover which was associated with the spring equinox, not the state of the barley harvest. The main purpose of the biblical instructions is that there should be harvestable barley by the time it was required at the first fruits offering. It is this connection with the state of ripeness which gives the observed calendar, or Abib calendar, its unique characteristic. Let's move on to the mathematical proof of the various calendar Metonic cycles. I will show you where all the source information comes from, and I encourage you to take the time to do these same calculations for yourself. Take a different range of years and see if the same relationships reveal themselves. First, for a range of years, we need to determine the dates of the new moon. Remember, each new month is tied to the new moon phase. Since we are interested in the spring equinox, which is March 25 in the Julian calendar, we really need only a month or two before and a month after the equinox. In this presentation, we'll consider the 19-year period between 21 AD and 40 AD. This is the lunar phase information which has been calculated for several millennia by Vero Essene. For each year, record the range of dates of the new moon. Next, put in the associated Jewish year number. You have to remember that even though we are interested in the beginning of the religious year in the spring, the start of the civil year and the change in year number happens 6 months before in the fall season. Now, we will go year by year and apply the new year rules for each calendar and see what happens. First, year 21 AD, which is 3781 AM. The Jewish year. The new moon phases occurred on February 1st, March 3rd, April 1st, and May 1st that year. We'll consider the calendars in the following order: the Babylonian calendar, the modern Jewish calendar, and the Jewish calendar based on barley ripeness. We have discovered that the Babylonians started their year on the first new moon after the spring equinox. Since March 25 is the equinox in the Julian calendar, the first month after would start on April 1st. The modern Jewish calendar has the rule of the equinox that if Passover, which is Nisan 14, would occur before the equinox, then add an extra month. So adding 14 days to March 3rd would be before March 25th. So the new year would occur on April 1st. The Jewish calendar based on barley ripeness needs to take into account that the green ears of barley show up around the equinox and then require at least 2 to 3 weeks to further ripen. So April 1st would be the start of the new year in this calendar. Moving on to the next year, 22 AD or 3782 AM, we know that a 12-month lunar year is 354 days long and is 11 days short of a solar year. Looking at the previous year, the new year happened on April 1st. 12 lunar months later, and roughly 11 days short, a new moon happened on March 22nd. Is this when the new year would happen this year? Let's apply the rules for the calendars. The Babylonian New Year must occur after the spring equinox, so March 22nd is too early. The next new moon is April 21st, and so an extra month is added for that calendar. The modern Jewish calendar requires that Nisan 14, the middle of the month, happens on or after the equinox. With March 22nd as the start of the month and going forward 14 days, that is well past the equinox, and so it works out. The Jewish Abib calendar requires barley ripeness 2 to 3 weeks after the equinox. With March 22nd as the start of the month, this does allow for 2 weeks after the equinox for ripe barley to be present. For this year, only the Babylonian calendar requires an extra month to be added. The other two calendars do not. The next year, 23 AD or 3783 AM, has new moons happen on February 10, March 12th, April 10th, and May 10th, all 11 or so days short of the previous year. The previous year had the Babylonian calendar start on April 21st. 12 months later, the year would start on April 10th, which is after the equinox. This satisfies the calendar rules. For the modern Jewish calendar, 12 months from the previous year falls on March 12th. Would the middle of the month occur on or past the equinox? Yes. March 26th is just past the equinox, so the year would begin this month. The Abib-based calendar takes into account 2 to 3 weeks of ripening after the equinox. Would March 12th allow this? No. The middle of the month would put it right around the time of the equinox. An additional month is required to provide time for ripe barley. So the new year would begin on April 10th. For this year, both the Babylonian and Abib-based calendar start in April. The modern Jewish calendar would start in March. Now consider if you wanted to know the equivalent date of Nisan 14 in the Julian calendar. Which Metonic cycle would you use, and which is correct? The modern Jewish calendar came into use around 350 AD. Can it provide accurate dates for this particular year of 23 AD? If the Jews were using an observation-based calendar and needed ripe barley, then the modern calendar rules lead to an inaccurate date of sometime in March. The Abib-based calendar has an extra month, pushing the actual historical date into April. This is what has not been recognized by scholars for centuries. This is why many accepted dates, which use the modern rules to determine the equivalent dates, are simply wrong and must be re-examined. But we're not done yet. We've only gone 3 years. There's more amazing realizations to come. The next year is 24 AD, or 3784 AM. The new moons happened on January 31st, March 1st, March 30th, and April 29th. For the Babylonian and Abib-based calendars, 12 months later would be March 30th. This is after the equinox and satisfies the rules for both. The modern Jewish calendar is looking at March 1st as a potential start of the year. However, 14 days later, and a March 15 Passover date is well before the equinox on March 25th. Therefore, an extra month must be added. This calendar's new year would begin on March 30th too. The following year is 25 AD, or 3785 AM. Here, 12 months from the previous year is March 18th. Even though it is before the March 25th equinox, the modern Jewish calendar rules are satisfied, and the Abib-based calendar rules are satisfied. But the Babylonian calendar must add an additional month in order for the start of the year to occur after the equinox. 26 AD, or 3786 AM, is next. For March 8th, the modern Jewish calendar rule of Nisan 16 occurring on or after the equinox is satisfied. However, the Abib-based calendar must add an additional month in order to provide 2 to 3 weeks after the equinox. The start of the year gets pushed to April 6th along with the Babylonian calendar. For 27 AD, or 3787 AM, the date of February 26th is much too early for any of the calendar rules. They all start on March 27th, with the modern Jewish calendar having to add an additional month in between. We arrive at 28 AD, or 3788 AM. 12 months later is March 15th, which satisfies the requirements of the modern Jewish calendar, which provides for Passover after the equinox. However, the Babylonian calendar must begin after an extra month on April 13th, and the Abib-based calendar also requires an extra month to provide for the ripening of the barley after the equinox. 29 AD, or 3789, is next. Here again, 12 months later, on March 5th, the date is too early to satisfy any of the rules of the calendars. An extra month is added for the modern Jewish calendar, and all new years start on April 3rd. The next year, 30 AD, or 3790 AM, has a 12-month span end on March 23rd. Both the modern Jewish calendar and the Abib-based calendar rules allow for the year to start here and provide for the Passover to occur properly. The Babylonian calendar requires an additional month and so starts on April 22nd. The following year is 31 AD, or 3291 AM. 12 lunar months later is March 14th. The modern Jewish calendar satisfies its rules to have this as the start of the year. However, the Abib-based year will not have evidence of green barley ears for a couple more weeks when the equinox occurs. Therefore, an additional month is required and will set the start of the year on April 12th. In the middle of the month, Passover would occur on April 25th that year. For those that can see the significance, this date has been hidden from history for many centuries already. In 32 AD, or 3792 AM, 12 lunar cycles later, occurs on March 3rd. This date is much too early for any of the calendar rules, and so the modern Jewish calendar requires an extra month to push the start of the year to April 1st. The following year is 33 AD, or 3793 AM. The March 21st date as the start of the year satisfies the rules for both the modern Jewish calendar and the Abib-based calendar. Since the equinox has not happened, the Babylonian calendar requires an additional month and starts on April 20th. We're getting to the final stretch. Again, this might be tedious to go through, but each year needs to be considered against the calendar rules in order to determine the start of the year. What we will see as a result will shock you. For 34 AD, or 3794 AM, March 10th still fulfills the requirements for the modern Jewish calendar, but the Abib-based calendar requires an additional month to allow for barley ripeness after the March 25th equinox. The start of the year occurs on April 8th. In 35 AD, or 3795 AM, the March 29th date for the new year meets all the requirements of the various calendars. Let's consider 36 AD, or 3796 AM. 12 lunar months later is the date of March 17th.
You have surfed to Jackson Snyder Presents, produced by the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original. We'll be right back after this break.
The rules for the Babylonian calendar specify an additional month pushing the start of the year to April 16. But for the modern Jewish calendar and the Abib-based calendar, March 17 does meet the requirements for their rules. In 37 AD, or 3797 AM, the March 6th date does not allow for ripe barley for the Passover, so an extra month is required for the Abib-based calendar. For 38 AD, or 3798 AM, all calendars have rules that allow for March 25th as the start of the year. In 39 AD, or 3799 AM, March 16th is the start of the year for the modern Jewish calendar rules. However, the Babylonian calendar needs an extra month in order to start after the equinox. The Abib-based calendar needs to allow for several more weeks of barley ripening, but both of those start on April 14th. And last, 40 AD, or 3800 AM, has April 2nd as the start of the year for the Babylonian and Abib-based calendars. March 4th is much too early for the modern Jewish calendar, and so an additional month also pushes it to April 2nd. At last, done. Now let's examine what has been revealed. We have taken a 19-year range and have determined which years require an additional month. Each calendar has a different criteria for when an extra month should be added. If we list where all the extra months occur for each calendar, we can put together a list of years within the 19-year cycle. For the Babylonian calendar, we construct a list, and for the modern Jewish calendar, and also for the Abib-based observational calendar. Now let's take these three lists and compare them with the Metonic cycles that have come from ancient documents. Do you notice anything? Each of the calculated cycles that we have just constructed match the Metonic cycles that have been recovered from ancient documents, and they match exactly. These cycles are not random. Here is the mathematical proof for where they are anchored in the 19-year cycle. Each cycle depends on a particular relationship with the spring equinox. This gives them their unique pattern. I know this might have been long and tedious, but it was required. I don't know of anyone who has actually worked through an entire Metonic cycle for these various calendars before. Not that I've come across anyways. And it was a necessity in order to compare the results with that of the historical documents that have been examined. There are some very important conclusions that are now evident. The first is the realization that Metonic cycles are not randomly generated. A calendar with particular rules regarding how a year should begin results in a particular Metonic cycle pattern. We have seen 3 different calendars with 3 different rules of starting the year. That is why 3 different Metonic cycles have been generated. Second, the modern Jewish calendar is tied to the equinox rule. That is, Nisan 16 should occur on or after the spring equinox. This particular rule was officially codified after 350 AD and no earlier. Therefore, the use of this particular Metonic cycle to determine accurate historical dates before that time is not mathematically supported. This was not how the calendar functioned during the Temple era. Any historical dates which have been accepted as historical fact should be re-examined according to this new evidence. Third, during the many hundreds of years of the Temple era, the calendar was based on observation. In particular, the state of the barley harvest or that of Abib, based on the fact that barley has a small window of flowering and ripening that is tied to the particular latitude of the Jewish homeland, and that ripening starts around the time of the spring equinox. The unique Metonic cycle that results is evidence that it is the proper Metonic cycle to use for the Jewish calendar. It fulfills the requirements laid out in the Jewish scriptures and matches all the historical evidence of how the calendar operated during that period. This Metonic cycle should be used in determining accurate historical dates during this period. And the final conclusion is that the Abib-based calendar should be the method in use today. The modern calendar rules have strayed from the original intention of how the calendar should be maintained. We have seen that an entirely different Metonic cycle has resulted, which shifts the start of the years around. Only by using the Metonic cycle, which results from the state of the barley harvest, does the calendar maintain its correct relationship with the spring equinox and the proper harvest timing. Obviously, these conclusions have far-reaching implications. The entire system of a nation's calendar construction has been mathematically shown to be flawed. The other major implication is that historical dates, which have been accepted as accurate, are now questionable. Many of the problems that have been identified through the years could very well be solved by re-examining them with the Abib-based Metonic cycle. Many prophecies found in Scripture, which have been consistently problematic, should also be re-examined to determine the effects from this new research. Further presentations will delve deeply into these areas because this has only been the foundation of what has been discovered.
It has been a while since releasing a new video. The 3 previous series of videos were done in a relatively close span of time. I really wanted to get that information released as fast as possible. It was a lot of effort, but then I took a break to observe how the videos were received. If there was not much interest, it did not make sense to continue. I released the information on multiple platforms. They have seen a modest amount of interest over the past 6 months. I do not have other social media accounts, so I depend on sharing and word of mouth. If you find this information useful and truthful, please consider sharing links to these videos in your circle of influence. I noticed that just recently something must have tweaked some increased interest, as a lot of views have happened over the past week. That is very encouraging, and I hope to find out exactly what it was that got that interest. But that has also encouraged me to again release more of my research. If you've gone through my previous videos, you see I'm navigating a pretty fine line. These topics have centuries of tradition built up around them. Many wise and learned people have written much that has shaped our understanding. And even in the recent modern times, there are popular teachers who have great numbers of followers who accept their various teachings as absolute biblical fact. However, just because many people believe something is true doesn't necessarily mean it is. Everything must be examined to verify if it aligns with all of God's rules and plans. But then there are those others who do not take accepted teachings at face value and do question them. However, many of these people take things too far and insert their biases and assumptions, and this leads to wild speculation and systems which are plainly heretical. So we must be careful of accepting alternatives just because we know that tradition may be wrong. So this is what I mean when I say I'm navigating a fine line. There is much value in examining our generally accepted traditions. However, when some error is identified and there is evidence to back those claims up, many people have difficulty accepting this. It can threaten their shaky foundations and ego too much. They quickly bring up those who have been shown to have heretical teachings and have gone too far in their personal interpretations. They paint everything by that one very big brush. They do not allow for the possibility that they may have a flawed understanding and that there is a narrow truth that has finally been identified, which is actually correct. It's been 15 years since I first tried to get in contact with these type of popular teachers and present my research that there are alternate solutions which very well might be the correct way to interpret things. However, to date, not a single teacher, expert, or pastor will give me the time of day. 15 years of rejections and being ignored. But I am encouraged by a few responses I've had recently to these videos, where viewers like yourself do see the research showing that these alternate interpretations have much value and could very well be correct. I hope to hear more feedback from those of you who have carefully considered what I have presented. But let's talk about the topic for this presentation. In my series about the rediscovery of the accurate biblical Jewish calendar, I offered various evidences that the calendar has been modified and that the modern calendar rules cannot be used to accurately date historical events. I mentioned that there were evidences in the writings of Josephus. That was not the main topic, and so I did not elaborate at that time. In this presentation, I want to go back to one of those pieces of evidence and present it in detail. I'll remind you briefly how the calendar works. The Jewish calendar is a luni-solar calendar. That is, it is based on the phases of the moon and uses the sun to keep it synchronized with the seasons. Each month starts with the new moon phase and can be either 29 or 30 days long. 12 of these months average to 354 days. Since that is less than the length of a solar year, that is 365.25 days, each year slips earlier and earlier into the previous season. After 3 years, the lunar year has lost an entire month as compared with the solar year. So every 2 or 3 years, an extra month is added, an intercalary month. This is done before the month of Nisan, which is the beginning of the religious year, the month that contains Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. This pattern of an additional month every 2 to 3 years makes up a cycle of 19 years and is called the Metonic cycle. This cycle has been in its current form since at least 350 AD, when the current modern calendar rules were officially released. However, how do we know that the current Metonic 19-year cycle was operating before that date? Since there can be a period of 3 years between each possible intercalary month, how do we know that the pattern was not shifted 1 or 2 years? This is extremely important information to know if one wants to date historical events before 300 AD. If the Metonic cycle was not operating according to the modern cycle and was actually offset by 1 or 2 years, then dates could potentially be 1 month off of when they actually occurred in history. And this is what my research has proven. Many biblical scholars and researchers do not recognize this important problem with the modern Jewish calendar. And that is amazing to me. But as I stated at the start, this is one of those accepted traditions which many take at face value and do not investigate further. And when the evidences that I have discovered are presented, they cannot or will not accept it. Most likely, it would destroy the house of cards that they have developed. One of the most important sources for this is from the work of the Muslim scholar al-Biruni. It seems it is not widely recognized. I went into great detail in my previous presentation. However, the historian Josephus also contains evidence that the Metonic cycle was not operating according to the modern calendar, but was actually shifted 1 year previous. It is indirect evidence, but it is very convincing. Let's look at his discussion of the time of Herod and the death of Tiberius. Herod the Tetrarch and his friends went up to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice to God, an ancient festival of the Jews being then just approaching. And when he had been there and been honorably entertained by the multitude of the Jews, he made a stay there for 3 days, within which time he deprived Jonathan of the high priesthood and gave it to his brother Theophilus. But when on the 4th day letters came to him, which informed him of the death of Tiberius. And you can find this in Antiquities of the Jews. So here we have a timeline which has some very exact dates. Notice that he says that Herod arrived in Jerusalem at the time of a Jewish festival. He was there 4 days when he received news from Rome that Tiberius had died. We can determine this exact date in history. We can find when Tiberius died. We can then look at the Jewish festival dates and find the one that is closest to this time of year. So let's do that. The death of Tiberius has been dated to March 16th, 37 AD. Now let's find out what date this is using the modern Jewish calendar rules. According to the converter found on midrash.org, March 16th, 37 AD was on Nisan the 12th. The converter at abdicate.net says the date was Nisan the 10th. The Jewish festivals which occur in the spring is the grouping of Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Feast of First Fruits. Passover, as the start of the festival, always begins on Nisan 14 every year. So with the death occurring on Nisan 10, or at the latest Nisan 12, is it actually possible for the news to travel from Rome to Jerusalem by Nisan 18th, which is about 6 days? I would think that it would be highly unlikely. Actually, impossible. But there is actually a further bit of information that tells us that it was not possible. In the discussion about first fruits, we discovered that there was a requirement to have ripe barley in order for the priest to wave it before the Lord on that day. Barley does not ripen until after the spring equinox in that part of the world. The dates of March 16th to 20 do not allow for ripe barley to be available. An intercalary month would have to be added that year, which would push the feasts out 30 days into the next month. That year must have had an additional month added. Since the modern Jewish calendar rules do not allow for an intercalary month for that year, we know that the rules are inaccurate. This is the proof that we cannot use the modern calendar to provide accurate dates for this year. A different Metonic cycle was in operation during that time. And as I've shown and mathematically proven, the Metonic cycle based on the ripeness of the winter barley results in a different cycle being in operation for the surrounding centuries. This different cycle does provide for an accurate historical date and allows for the information that Josephus records to work correctly. Therefore, Tiberius died on March 16th, 37 AD, and the news of his death arrived in Jerusalem about 5 weeks later, during the time of the main spring religious festivals, and not 1 week later, as the modern Jewish calendar rules would have us believe. This evidence also proves that the very common assumption that Jesus Christ died on the cross 4 years earlier, in 33 AD, is also in error. That assumption is also based on using the modern calendar rules. However, if one uses the rules based on the ripeness of the winter barley, the death of Jesus accurately occurred in 31 AD. If you haven't watched my presentation, which includes additional evidences, please watch the 2-part series, The Date Hidden from History. This has been a shorter video. I wanted to present a single topic in detail. I hope to do similar videos in the future giving further insights into the topics I have already presented. There is so much information, and I had to limit the previous presentations to just the most relevant evidence. Some of the topics I'm considering are a deeper dive into what the covenant is in Daniel 9. Also, who were the Magi and the discovery that they were prophesied about in the Old Testament, and how the timeline in Revelation should be understood. I'm also considering a series of videos which are responses to misunderstandings by popular prophecy teachers. If you have suggestions of what you'd like to see first, let me know. Or if there are things which are not clear in these videos and you'd like more information, I can also consider that. There's lots to talk about.
You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio. Congratulations, Bogdan, on your big win at the Gifford Talent Show.
Oh, well, you heard about that?
Sure did.
Well, that's a miracle, because I win that, I get applause, and I get big shot of self-esteem.
Well, as the big winner, I want to shake your hand.
Wait a minute, brother Snyder. Bogo.
What's the problem?
Brother Snyder, don't you see these great big hands, all swelled up with arthritis? You squeezed my hand too hard, it hurt terrible. I think I'm going to just lay down and die.
Oh, no, wait a minute. You don't have any problem at all.
What do you mean?
Well, sir, I've got a new jar of Tikkun Olam pain relief cream.
Oh, that won't do any good, surely.
No, really. I just rubbed this into my sore hands myself, and the pain went away. And then when I sprained my ankle last week, I did the same thing. I was really surprised. This is a true testimony.
Well, okay, if you think it will help, I will try it.
All right, I'll go get it.
The next day.
Well, there's the big winner. Good morning, Bogdan.
And good morning to you, Brother Snyder. I'm a big winner every day now that I have Tikkun Olam pain cream. Yes, it worked like a charm.
That's because it's got prayer power. Made by hand by a believer like us.
So then, where do I get more of this pain cream?
Oh, you can get that in all kinds of other remedies made of the finest ingredients and by hand at tickolam.com. That's TIKOLAM.com. Let me buy you a jar, Bogdan.
Oh, no, Brother Snyder. Let me go first see if Medicare pay for it.
Well, I don't know whether Medicare will pay for it, but if you want some great products that I use, go to tickolam.com. That's TIKOLAM.com. Yahad member certified.
Oh yes, we have to have that.